Hi, welcome to Dog Body Language, talking about understanding, evaluating, and intervening in concerning or aggressive body language in dogs. So, my name's Liz. I'm going to be talking you through a variety of different pieces of body language and the importance of understanding and how to get ahead of increasing signs of fear, anxiety, and stress in our animals. So, why is it important to fully understand dog body language? Primarily, it's because body language is our dog's first language, where we as humans both use verbal language and we are very reliant on that verbal communication to understand what someone else is feeling, understanding their tone, understanding the way that they speak, the words that they choose. This is what dogs are looking for in understanding one another and expecting us to understand them. They use how they're moving their body, the way that they're positioning themselves, the reactions and the tension within specific parts of their body. This is how they first communicate discomfort or displeasure, or enjoyment or pleasure. So, recognizing those emotions early allows us to change our behavior to match the dog's needs and to fulfill their needs. Predicting those situations that might cause reactions, being able to observe, lets us set up the environment for our dog's success. And preventing the rehearsal of more intense aggressive behaviors means that we can set up situations that keep us safe, that keep our dogs safe, and that keeps the general public at large safe. And then lastly, providing an environment where dog body language is easily understood means that dogs can rely on subtler forms of communication to communicate their discomfort, their fear, their anxiety, and their stress, rather than escalating to more concerning behaviors and behaviors that we as humans would perceive as aggressive or harmful. So, being able to identify those signals early on means that we can potentially avoid those signals from escalating into the behaviors that we typically see in our challenging dogs. So, what do those signs of aggression look like? What do those signs of fear, anxiety, and stress look like? Is all in this chart. So this is a very busy page, but I want to talk through it a little bit. And this might be a familiar scale directly from the Fear Free website of looking at the spectrum of fear, anxiety, and stress. And something that I want to emphasize here, and I will come back to emphasizing when we're talking about the canine ladder of aggression, is how many signs of distress dogs can exhibit before we hit the behaviors that we as humans typically associate with those signs of anxiety and stress. So early on, we're looking at very relaxed dogs, and you can see at the bottom of the page there, I have some very relaxed dogs. Maybe either at I would say a 0 for the dog at the bottom left in the muzzle. She is fully relaxed, laying on her back, super neutral, willing to ignore anything else in her environment for the enjoyment of the roll in the grass. The dog on the right might be a little bit, maybe at a level 1. She's interested in her environment. I wouldn't say she's anxious, but she is absolutely alert to her environment. And then as we progress up through those pictures, you start seeing other pieces of those specific behaviors as dogs move into some mild and subtle signs of distress, moving to some moderate signs, and then up at the top we have some more potentially severe signs of fear, anxiety, or stress in those dogs that are pictured. Now, one thing that I want to mention, and I'll come back to later, is that some of this stress is happy stress. If we took a look at that little puppy on the bottom right, she's not anxious, but there is still stress in just the act of being alert. If we fast forward up to the top left, we see that same dog now grown up with another German Shepherd, and body language looks a little tense. They were actually very happily running together and yelling and having a lot of fun, but in a very high arousal state, which can lend itself to trigger stacking of more stress if something unpleasant were to have happened at that moment, or if they were to have gotten into each other's faces. So kind of keeping that in mind, that when we talk about stress, we're not necessarily talking about negative emotions, but we're talking about alertness, arousal, and tense body language, all leaning towards if something unpleasant were to happen, that's those stressors would contribute to the intensity of the dog's reaction. So we'll come back to that a little bit later, but just want to keep that in mind as we look at the pictures and the videos that we have throughout this presentation. So we're going to come back to these dogs later, but I want to use this as your initial pulse check of how do you think, as you look at these three pictures of three very different dogs, how do you think these dogs are feeling? Think about what specific pieces of body language stand out to you, if any, but just what emotion you take from each of these photos and what your first gut instinct is to what these dogs are feeling. And as you think about that, think about what about their body, what about, this moment that's frozen in time, what about it tells you that they are feeling a particular way? What do you first notice when you look at a dog? Because sometimes dogs that we're able to read more readily, especially if they look similar to or they remind us of dogs we have at home or that we've had in our lives, those are the pieces of dog body language that we personally, individually, most gravitate towards in understanding how a dog is feeling. And so that's something to be aware of as we talk about the variety of different signs that dogs can show, and especially when dogs can show conflicted signs of their level of stress or their level of interest or their level of comfort. What maybe we need to be a little more aware of because they're not the first things that we look for. So as you're thinking about what you first take in about these three, again, very different dogs who are feeling very different things in these moments, what do you first notice? And maybe as we go further, and we're going to come back to all three of these dogs, what did you miss or what did you not notice or what wasn't as evident to you in these pictures that maybe is going to be helpful to be aware of in the future as you're looking at more dogs to make sure that you're really taking in full account of how they might be feeling in the moment. And so that's where we get to a ladder of aggression. You also might be familiar with this. It's been displayed in a lot of different ways all over the internet, but essentially looking at how dogs tend to escalate their behavior. And there's a lot of reasons why this escalation might not progress in exactly this way, why dogs might skip steps, but essentially, the initial behaviors, the initial signs of distress are avoidance or appeasement behaviors, where dogs will yawn or lip lick or blink. They'll turn their head away. You'll also see in this kind of category that kiss to dismiss, if that's a term that you've heard used before, where dogs will actually use licking the person or the dog that's too close to them, using that to move them away rather than using licking as an expression of affection. This is appeasement. This is trying to um, de-escalate the situation, but also increase the distance between them and the source of their stress. So you see a lot of those initial avoidance and appeasement behaviors that escalate into some more intense ones where the dog might actually fully turn their body away, might sit and look away, might walk away. And then you start seeing more movement, more obvious, I think what most people would decide are submissive, quote unquote, behaviors. But these are still avoidance behaviors that absolutely can still escalate into dogs who, once they feel like all of these other things aren't being attended to, you might see them start stiffening up, start staring, growling, snapping, and biting. And those are the behaviors that we as humans tend to associate with this is an aggressive behavior. This is a sign of fear. This is a sign of distress of when that dog maybe starts stiffening up. But if you look at this ladder of aggression, that's really a point where they have already likely tried many, many things before they're at that point. And if you look through the photos on to the left of the screen, you'll see dogs who are kind of going through each of those levels of behaviors. You see a dog with a lowered head at the bottom. This is Mo. He does not like having his picture taken. So he's got a lowered head. He's averted his eyes. He's lip licking. I think he yawned right after this as well. And then you have Udon right above him, who has turned his body away. He's sitting back. He's kind of moving himself back. His ears are tucked back. And then we have dogs who start to stiffen, staring, really, really hard stares. And then lastly, of course, you have the growling, biting, snapping dog, who is actually a dog having a fantastic time doing dog sports, but is absolutely in a heightened state of arousal and aggression. Now, there's a lot of reasons why dogs might skip steps or move through steps really quickly. That might be out of surprise or pain, particularly the combination of the two. If a dog is painful, has something medical going on, that's something to absolutely be aware of and something to consider if a dog who previously was either remaining very low on the ladder or not escalating behaviors is suddenly escalating behaviors, to make sure to consider that pain might be an element in their behavior. Also, the history of responses to that aggression, to those behaviors. Now, I think when we talk about history, we initially think of, oh, was something punished? One of the big things that's out there is you don't punish a growl, which is absolutely true. We don't want to punish a growl. Growling is communication, and it's very important communication. And if those behaviors that are below the biting and the snapping are punished when they occur, the dog is most likely to skip them, to suppress those behaviors until they're at a level of discomfort, fear, aggression, or anxiety or stress. And they just jump to those last levels of repulsion, of get this thing, get this person, get this animal away from me, in a way that is more aggressive rather than less so, more intense rather than less so. But I would argue that some of the more intense histories surrounding these behaviors is often happening before growling is even occurring to be punished, and more some of those early signs just being fully ignored, um, either through not being aware that they are signs of distress, and a lack of awareness and a lack of attention to those signs, or out of just, the human deciding that, yes, I understand you're a little bit uncomfortable, but this is going to happen, and pushing forward through those signs of distress. So, yes, punishment history can absolutely play into dogs' intensity or rapidity of moving up the ladder of aggression, skipping steps on the ladder of aggression. But ignoring a history of ignoring those early signs can make a dog skip them, because they have proven that they're not effective communication and they do want the sensation, the trigger for their distress, to stop. In addition, you also have the degree of stress that they're under. This is where trigger stacking comes in. And trigger stacking is a concept that basically says that if there are multiple stressors happening either concurrently or continuously, and continuously can be over several days. If there are multiple levels of stress, there is more likely a small stressor going to result in higher intensity and higher degree of aggression and reaction. And that makes sense, right? It's the same thing that happens to us when little annoyances add up to that straw that breaks the camel's back, where we react disproportionately to a small inconvenience because there's been multiple inconveniences before that moment. There's been multiple irritants or stressors before that moment. Same thing happens to dogs. If there's a stacked degree of stress, if those triggers have stacked one on top of another, they're more likely to shoot up that ladder of aggression more quickly. Keeping in mind that this applies to, again, as I said on the previous slide, both good stress and bad stress. So a high arousal situation is more likely to, if something stressful comes up that is de-stressing to the dog, that the dog wants to repulse, they are more likely to hit higher levels on the ladder of aggression than if that same dog were experiencing that same trigger at a lower arousal level. So good stress can contribute to that, and past stress can contribute to that. What we often don't think about is the fact that what is happening to the dog is not only what's happening in that one moment that they are experiencing stress, but it's also influenced by what happened 5 minutes ago, 3 hours ago, and 3 days ago. All of those things are playing into the dog's reaction because their stress hormones are still reflecting what's happened to them over the past several days. Their adrenaline is still reflecting what happened to them a few minutes ago. So everything is stacking on itself. And that's why one question that I ask clients consistently is, does your dog have times where they are not going to be exposed to triggers? And by times, meaning, do they have longer periods of time to truly decompress from those triggers? Because that's incredibly important in avoiding trigger stacking and avoiding jumping that ladder of aggression. And then also considering whether or not that stress is immediate or experienced over time. So this also feeds into that trigger stacking of, is this chronic levels of stress? If the stress is chronic, if it is consistent with the dog, they may jump steps on the ladder of aggression when they finally snap because of that trigger stacking. So a lot of different things play into whether or not the dog progresses fully through the canine ladder of aggression. But we can see signs of this behavior starting when they are engaging in avoidance or appeasement behaviors, not only when they are escalating to those repulsion behaviors. So I want to look at signs of stress, and I want to talk about the signs of stress you might see in these pictures. So there's a lot of different things going on in these photos. And as you look through them, I want you to kind of ask yourself and think about whether or not you believe the dog in the photo to be stressed, what you would consider their degree of stress is, what you would consider, where they might fall on that fear, anxiety, and stress scale, where you might expect them to sit on the canine ladder of aggression if something additional were to happen, if they were to decide to aggress. And are these dogs, am I throwing red herrings in here? Are these dogs even stressed in these photos? And in answer to that, in the very unhelpful way of everything is dependent on the individual, the answer is maybe. Maybe these dogs are stressed. In many of these pictures, the dogs look perfectly happy or generally relaxed. But let's start at the upper left-hand corner. We have the dog with their mouth open. Now, in this picture, the dog with their mouth open is actually mid catching a treat. So what you may have identified as, well, maybe that dog is barking, so they're stressed. She's not. She's not barking. However, she is also, I can tell you, in her first day of a new training program with a trainer she has only met briefly. She is working in her neighborhood where she has a history of reactions and a history of stressors because she is dog reactive, and she does live on a busy street. So there are reasons for heightened emotion here. There is a history of reactions where she is. There's a history of stressors. There's the potential for stressors. There's the stress of meeting someone new. There is the good stress of having delicious treats. She's very food motivated. So these are things that can absolutely play into the intensity of a reaction. And it's one reason why you might see a dog who is very typically reactive in their neighborhood with their owner has no trouble with the dog walker or the trainer who comes out. Because while all that history is there and while there's excitement of meeting a new person, for some dogs that might be balanced out by the trainer not having a history of losing confidence in their ability to prevent a reaction from that dog in this neighborhood. Or even if the dog walker is unaware that the dog is likely to be reactive to a certain dog or passing a certain yard. If there is confidence in that handler, that also can influence the dog's emotional state. So this is not me saying that you are passing your dog's anxiety onto them, because that is not at all true. But it is true that the environment is impacting this dog a lot in this moment. And so maybe she's stressed and maybe she's not. But there's a lot of factors at play in the environment that are going to influence that past what you can see in an image, past what you can see in the moment. Same for the shepherd. You'll see the shepherd a lot. This is my shepherd Fig. The same for the shepherd who is looking back at her handler near the bench at the top of the page. This looks like a fairly calm picture. It's a nice misty morning. Looks like a fairly chill environment. However, it is at a nose work trial. Now, Fig very much enjoys nose work. Sniffing is a relaxing behavior for a lot of dogs. She has a lot of fun with it. So maybe there is some relief of stress there. But we are in a trial. And in a trial or competitive situation, even if the dog doesn't fully understand that they're competing, they do understand that their human is way more keyed up than normally. So there's another situation where a handler might be influencing the dog's degree of stress. In addition to that, she is being brought into new spaces and asked to do this task that she does know how to perform, but hasn't performed in this space. There are people nearby, there's a judge, there are spectators, there is obviously a person with a camera, all of whom she's not met before. And after she does this search, she's going to go back up in her crate for a good portion of the day while she's, contained in the car between searches. That's a lot of potential stress for a dog, depending on that particular dog's mentality, depending on that particular dog's temperament, depending on how that particular dog is feeling that day. So then we have, let's move down, right down underneath that photo of 3 shepherds sitting together, looking very happy, very relaxed. It looks like they just finished up a hike. So maybe they got the opportunity to decompress. Maybe they've gotten some energy out. Maybe this could be a very low stress situation. Except the 2 shepherds on either side of the photo, with my dog Fig in the middle, are litter mates who have a history of aggression towards one another. And this was a very controlled rehab hike. Now, it was a very successful rehab hike. It was a very enjoyable hike, and they all had a really good time, and they are very happy dogs. But there is a shared history of aggression amongst them. And so that could also be a reason to suddenly intensify if something unpleasant were to happen. And that's what I really want to kind of capitalize on across the board in these photos. So to quickly go through a few other ones, if you look at the little puppy just to the right of that photo, he looks very happy, but it is his first time out at a pet store. It's fairly busy. He's also with a handler that's fairly new to him. If we look at the pit and the lab, who are right in the center photo, they're playing, they're having a great time. It's high arousal play. They're boarding in a new place, and they just met one of them just met their handler fairly recently. Similar to Fig, down on the middle left, who's chasing something. She is at a coursing trial where she has been very keyed up, standing in line with other barking dogs, barking as she wants to chase this thing, very much in a prey drive as she's chasing something. You have Mouse, my older dog, who is absolutely featured in this as well. She's got some good, interesting body language. She looks hunched. She looks like she might be uncomfortable with the child being that close to her. Her head is turned away from the kid. Her head is held lower than her body. However, she just got woken up and kicked out of her bedroom because we were about to leave the house we were staying in. Um, in order to prepare her for travel, she is on some sedation medication, and she's looking away from the little girl because she was licking her face and I called her name to take her picture. So a lot of things feeding into level of stress that isn't taken into account in that photo. The esky at the bottom looks very rapt attention to their handler, focused on them in the middle of a reactivity class. And of course, Dexter, who is the mud spattered dog on the bottom right, looks very happy, but has clearly been getting into some high energy, high arousal behaviors that could exacerbate a reaction if something else were to enter his environment that he found triggering. So, a lot of different things to kind of take into account when you're looking at situations. And ultimately, you can't evaluate stress by what is going on in the moment or even how it's perceived by the dog. In each of these photos, there could be a situation where the dog perceives the events as stressful. There could be a situation where the dog perceives the event as relaxing and enjoyable. And those things don't have to. Um, those aren't mutually exclusive. Those things both can exist within the same realm of experience. The dog can be enjoying themselves as well as being stressed. And that's where the importance of decompression comes in, because even if a dog is enjoying themselves in their day-to-day life, if they have these triggers, if they have these high arousal moments, and hopefully they do, a lot of high arousal moments are really enjoyable for dogs. I can tell you that in a good portion of these photos here, the dog is very much enjoying themselves. I'd say actually in all of these photos, The dogs had a great time in these pictures, in the events immediately preceding the pictures. I think each of these dogs would say that that what is going on around them is worth the stress, but there is still stress. And so that's where decompression becomes very important, because these are the activities and behavior that we expose our dogs to that do release stress, that allow adrenaline and cortisol levels to regulate, and helps prevent chronic trigger stacking. So these activities can look different for the dog. They can also look different for the stress they experienced. The dogs who went on a hike with their same-sex aggressive litter mates, that hike was maybe in some ways decompressing, but in other ways not too decompressing. So giving dogs the opportunity for a variety of decompression activities. And here I really emphasize relaxation. So being able to just come down and fully relax, not just sleep, but relax. Licking and chewing. So you have the dog in the center with some topples available to her that she is using to kind of get to know a new space. Or decompression hikes where the dog is really relaxing. And so you've got Miss Bailey down there at the bottom, very much enjoying a trip into the woods. So it can be different for the dog and for the stressor, but making sure that your dog has opportunities for their body language to loosen up, for them to expend the energy that they've saved up, and for them to relax from the stressors that have been influencing them most recently. So with all that in mind, I want to talk about how body language breaks down. And there's no real perfect separation of categories. Each of these categories is going to influence the other. And as part of that, something that's really important to take into account is that, and I have it at the top of every page so you won't forget, individual body language signals are like words in a sentence. They don't form the meaning in a vacuum. All of these different categories work together and influence one another to give you a more complete picture of how a dog is feeling. And that's why I mentioned when we went back early on in the presentation and we first looked at those 3 pictures that we are going to come back to. As you're looking at the things that help you determine individually whether you think a dog is enjoying themselves or not, is happy or not, is stressed or not, notice the things that you gravitate towards, and especially make note of the things that are influencing the dog's body language that you don't gravitate towards. Because all of these are important to take into account when you're looking at a new dog and trying to determine how they're feeling about the particular situation. So starting out, I'm looking at a dog's posture. So this is where I tend to look at it in with the lens of Suzanne Clothier's Geometry of Aggression, and talking about what shape I can make of the dog. And if the dog is making a very relatively equilateral shape, so a rectangle, or they're making a square, or they're making, whatever shape the dog is in, if it's all balanced on all sides, then that dog is more likely to be exhibiting neutral or even happy body language. But looking at weight shifts and specifically the directional shift of the dog's whole body is absolutely going to inform how they are feeling about a particular stimulus. So looking at a forward weight shift might be a dog who is more on alert, excited, aroused. A weight shift backwards is going to be a dog who is maybe a little more wary, maybe a little more unsure about the situation. Even shifts from side to side can indicate that a dog is ready to move and it has shifted their weight to be able to move quickly. And that's going to indicate a lack of assuredness in their posture. So taking posture into account, we can also look at their body itself. So here we have a picture of a very hackly little puppy. So in their body, we're looking at visible muscles. Can you see where their body is holding tension? Can you see muscles flexing? Piloerection, are there hackles on the body? So hackles are where the hair stands up. Typically for many dogs, it stands up starting between the shoulder blades. And for some dogs, just like this little puppy, it can extend down the length of their body. For some dogs, they will get butt hackles. It'll stand up just near the bottom of their rump and can sometimes connect between. I would say that hackles are not necessarily, again, words in a sentence, they're not necessarily a negative emotion in and of themselves. I know many dogs who hackle when they're very, very excited, but there's something to keep in mind as a dog who is in a highly aroused state. And if you're also seeing a lot of body tension, you're also seeing a lot of stiffness, you're not seeing a dog who is balanced in their entirety of their body and their posture and their movement upon approach, you're likely seeing a dog who is experiencing some degree of fear, anxiety, and stress. What I mean by movement upon approach is, are they moving stiffly? Are they moving in a straight line? Are they loose and wiggly? Or are they holding their body very upright? And you can see in this picture too, in addition to the hackles, which obviously are the star of this particular body language show. But this dog he's curled in a way that would indicate more polite greeting, but you can see his weight is shifted onto his outer feet, so he's shifted somewhat away from the dog that he's greeting. His back is absolutely tucked, and you can see a little bit of stiffness in the body where his muscles are standing out along his sides. So absolutely, many things about this dog's body are telling me that he is not entirely comfortable with the situation, on top of the hackles or the piloerection that's going on along his back. So then I mentioned that his tail was tucked and his rear end was held under. So let's talk about the tail. So one of the things to keep in mind is that the tail is connected to the dog's back end, which seems like an obvious thing to say, but it's something worth keeping in mind if you're working with a dog or you have a dog with a docked tail or no tail at all, that their back hips and the movement of their back end is still going to inform what a tail would look like if one were there. This is also true when we start talking about the face and I talk about their ears. If their ears aren't there, what would their ears be doing if they were there, based on the way that they're holding their body? So when we look at the tail, we're talking about position, type of movement, and speed of movement. So one thing that is a really common misconception is that a wagging tail is a happy dog. And I would love to see that myth perish, because very often a wagging tail is a sign of interest. Interest can be good, it can be bad, it can be confident, it can be insecure. It is merely a signal that the dog is alerted to something. So the position of their tail matters a lot. You have this still of this dog, and you can see there's some tension in her face, but her tail is telling its own story all by itself. It is straight up in the air. And this is not a normal tail carriage for this dog. If you look at this dog when they're relaxed, their tail is down. It's kind of like it's a kind of labby tail. Um, so for some dogs, you might have a dog whose tail does naturally stick up like that. A lot of the Spitzy dogs, the northern breeds, their tails are naturally held this way, but you can still see it perk up further than their natural carriage when they are amped up, and you still will see it fall down and tuck when they are uncertain. So, noting the position of the tail and how they're holding their tail or how they're holding their back end makes a huge difference in how they might be feeling. And then we have the type and the speed of movement. So, the type of movement, if they are wagging their entire tail, if that body is loose, that's more likely friendly, appeasing, a solicitous gesture from the tail. However, if most of the tail is stiff and you just see the tip of it wagging, that's more likely a avoidance, appeasement, uncertain behavior. The speed of the motion also matters. A neutral speed of movement, not too fast, not too slow, is what ideally we'd be looking for. Really, really fast, especially if it's fast and tight, is going to be super high arousal, potentially aggression. Really slow, and especially really low and slow, can be a sign of wariness or investigation. So keep in mind how the tail is moving, how quickly the tail is moving, and where it's held in relation to their body when you're looking at a wagging tail, to determine really how the dog is necessarily feeling about the environment and the situation that they're in. And then on the other side of their body, you're looking at their face. So looking at their face, hopefully looking at this dog, and we will go into this picture in great detail later. This is Mouse. This is my senior dog, who is much less of a senior in this photo than she is in real life. But looking at her mouth, which is clenched tight, her commissure, which is how she is holding her lips, her muzzle and whiskers. I like this picture for one reason, is that you can see every individual whisker pore stand out. How their eyes look. If their eyes are relaxed, they're going to be, again, dependent on the dog and their breed type. But generally, relaxed eyes are going to be more almond in shape. They're going to maybe even be lidded or half closed. How perked the ears are, or how drawn the ears are, and how wrinkled the brow is. So looking at the tension in the face. And all of this really goes back to tension and piloerection. The piloerection in the muzzle and the whiskers, as well as the tension in the face, is what's going to draw the eyes wide. It's what's going to draw the ears up or back. And it's what's going to draw the brow and the muzzle together. So looking at that tension in the face and how they're holding their face, especially again in comparison or in contrast to how that face normally appears, what their neutral is. And that can make sometimes things really tough, because we don't always have a chance to see a dog first at neutral. You know, if you're running into an unknown dog, or if this is a client dog, you don't necessarily see the dog in a neutral state before you see them in a highly aroused state. And that's where having experience with looking at a variety of different dogs, and why we're going to be looking at some photos and why we're going to be looking at some videos to kind of identify commonalities in that face, so you can make assumptions about, this is what this face probably looks like as neutral. This is what this face looks like when it's tense. It's also why it can be really helpful. One thing that I always ask my clients when we're starting a session together is, can you send me a picture, your favorite picture of your dog? Because usually your favorite picture of your dog is one where your dog looks very happy to be wherever they are. And I can see what neutral looks like on your dog. I can see what happy looks like on your dog. And so if I'm seeing something very different when I'm meeting the dog in person, I don't have to make assumptions about what is different about their face, what is different about their tail, or the way they're holding their body. I can see that comparative to the photo that you've sent me. So that's a reason that I have that included, as well as just being able to have fun pictures of your pups. But it's one reason why I include that, so we can see that neutrality, and contrast that to what we see when we are meeting the dog for the first time. And then we get to vocalization. This isn't necessarily strictly body language, because this is them verbalizing, but dogs can make a huge variety of noises. So there are some commonalities that you want to look for to help determine how the dog is feeling in the moment that they are reacting to you. So vocalizations varying in speed and frequency. A sharp, quick, clipped bark is more likely to be alert barking versus lower, more intense growls. Escalating barking, escalating vocalization can be can mean that a dog is growing increasingly stressed. So, looking at the tone and the intensity of the vocalization, as well as how quickly those barks are coming to the dog, can help you determine whether or not this is alert barking, whether this is reactive barking, whether this is excitement, what form of arousal is coming out with that vocalization. Generally speaking, when that vocalization goes low, and when it goes more full-throated, I think is the best way that I can describe it. When it falls further back in their throat and in their mouth, rather than being kind of at the forefront, that is when I am more concerned that a dog is prepared to escalate up the ladder of aggression, where some of those first barks, especially if they're fast and loud and frequent, that's usually a dog who is, maybe still stressed, but stressed in a less intense and less willing to escalate. They are looking to move the thing away from them, get the thing they want, rather than act physically to obtain the thing they want or to get the thing they want away. So that's something to keep in mind as we're looking at vocalization, and then just other factors of their body and their behavior. So, what do I mean by that? I mean their disengagement and their focus, both in is the dog able to disengage from a trigger, or are they hyper focused on that trigger? Those are the dogs who it's because Mouse does it, I associate it with pit bulls, but the dogs who you could wave their most favorite treat in the world directly in their face and they're not going to take their eyes off of the thing that's got them amped up. Where is their focus? Are they able to offer different focus? Are they able to offer calm focus? But you also have the dogs that are fearful and fully disengage and almost dissociate from the moment because they have suddenly started sniffing the ground in a spot where it doesn't make sense for the ground to be interesting. Maybe it's a room they've been in for hours and suddenly they are just engrossed in one particular spot to sniff. Other dogs will continually return to a water bowl or to a food bowl. Other dogs will start scratching themselves or licking themselves. So, where is their focus and what does that tell you about how they're feeling can vary depending on the dog. But generally, you want to see, are they enacting behaviors that you would consider normal and normal in their intensity for the situation that they're in? Where is their focus and is their ability to focus on a variety of things normal and at a normal level of intensity for the situation they're in? Similarly, their ability and their intensity of taking food. Dogs can go both ways when it comes to their interest in food around stressful triggers. Some dogs will continue to take food no matter what, but you might see them taking treats harder, meaning they might grab it quicker, they might actually bite down harder. Generally, these are all noticeable in how badly your hand hurts after you've offered them food. Or similarly, some dogs really, really slow down and they take treats more and more gently the more stressed that they're feeling, to a point where they might even refuse food that in another situation they absolutely would not be interested in refusing because they don't feel safe enough to eat. And then lastly, looking at shake-offs. Are they taking the opportunity to take breaks, including shaking off their body to loosen up tension, to make things more calm, to make things more relaxed as they progress through the situation? Shake-offs are always good signs that a dog is kind of taking a step back, and it's the equivalent of them taking that deep breath to calm themselves down after something stressful happened. So I want to take the opportunity to look at a couple of example dogs and talk through what changes in body language and what the happen and what those things tell me about the individual dog. So this is Mouse. You've met Mouse. She's she's been in a few of the clips before now. And so some things that I can tell you about Mouse. This is an adult at this point. In this picture, this is an adult pit bull terrier. She has a history of dog reactivity. She's very human social. And currently in these photos, she is at a reserved field with just her mom, nobody else. The space is fenced in. And she's just been playing recall games and chase for quite some time before these pictures were taken. I will also tell you that these pictures were taken about 15 seconds apart. These pictures were taken very, very close together. These were not on different days. These were not at different times. This is a reaction in real time. So take a moment to look over both sides of this photo and what it tells you about this dog's neutral, this dog's happy, and how that informs how the dog looks in the I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying the right side is the side where she is stressed. um this, what does this tell you about this dog's reaction? What is the body language you can see, and what might you expect to see happen next in this situation? So with Mouse, we can see that her eyes went from relaxed. You can see on the left side, they are, Not heavy lidded maybe yet, but they are, very relaxed, almond shaped. They go to round and those pupils dilate. Her ears are pricked up. She even had one ear that went fully like inside out, and her brow is furrowed. Now she is brindle, so she is a little stripy anyway, but you can see if you compare the two foreheads that she is wrinkled in the middle there. She has drawn her brow together, and that has pricked her ears up. And yes, she normally has kind of slightly, they're not pricked ears, but they're slightly up ears. They're not fully floppy, but they are definitely pricked in the second picture. You can see all this muscle tension in her neck where it's formed almost a ridge of skin and fur. You can see all those individual whiskers in her muzzle are puffed and visible. So she's got some piloerection in her face going on. You can probably make the safe assumption, that she also has hackles going down her back. Her body is pulled tight and forward. You can see that she has moved, she has shifted, so she is ready to launch up at any moment. And her mouth is no longer relaxed and open. It has slammed shut and clenched really tightly. So all of this happened. I can tell you what happened. All of this happened because the field we were in was reserved for us. It was rented for us, but it was up the hill, out of visibility, but up the hill from a dog park. And a scuffle broke out in the dog park, and this was her reaction to the noises of those dogs. So in this situation where I am in a secure environment, I know that the distraction is probably temporary. And I am also, where I am matters too. I am also sitting down. I am not standing with her. I am sitting. You can see from where the picture's taken, I am about level with her. In that first photo, and you can see I have moved to start standing up in the second. I went to give her a treat scatter and just get her through that moment, and allow her to kind of come down in that arousal, so we could return to this neutral state that I knew she could reach in this environment because she was just there. So those are how I intervened with that. But all of those changes informed me that she was moments away from a reaction, even though she had been neutral and relaxed a moment before that. So that's Mouse. The next dog we're going to meet is Ghibli. So Ghibli, these are not taken at the same time or taken too close together. You can see she's even wearing a different collar in both of the photos. She's at a different angle on the couch. But this is both Ghibli in her home, and a happy Ghibli and a not so happy Ghibli. So again, same thing, looking at this dog's face, looking at this dog's muscle tension, looking at this dog's behaviors. What can you identify both in the happy photo and in the unhappy photo that tells you that there's a happy dog in one photo and there's a not so happy dog in another photo? So in Ghibli's case, we're seeing these nice, not even relaxed eyes in the left photo. We have fully closed in bliss eyes. And they go from relaxed to round and dilated. Now, round and dilated means something very different in Ghibli's face than it did in Mouse's face, right? You can say, oh, Mouse's eyes went round here, and they are almost perfect spheres. They are very clearly what you would describe as round. Now, if you didn't have the rest of Ghibli's face, probably giving you more salient information that she's unhappy, you might not necessarily in a vacuum identify Ghibli's eyes as round here, but you can see even from her eye set from closed eyes that this is rounder, that her eyes are dilated, that they are rounder than they would otherwise be. And one thing that I like about Ghibli's face is that her markings really emphasize how tense the muscles are around her eyes right now, as everything pulls together, as her ears prick up and her brows furrowed in. We don't have a closed mouth in this one, but it is no less tense for being open, and I'd argue that it's even maybe a little tenser. Her mouth is no longer relaxed. It is open, but it is pulled back, and this is where I want to emphasize the difference between a relaxed open mouth and a tense open mouth. So you can see in the first picture, slightly different angle, but if you looked at Ghibli's face from the side in her relaxed photo, you would not see those back teeth. That is pulling back to see those teeth. You also notice that in her relaxed photo, you don't see her front teeth. Her muzzle is pulled up to show off all of her teeth. This is called an agonistic pucker. And this is absolutely a threat display of she is showing that she is willing to go to bat about about whatever has gotten her upset, which is another dog approaching. Because the other thing you can see in this last photo is that she's got her paws tensely, like you can see that one vein standing out in her paw of how tensely she is clutching the toy that's in front of her. And this happened because one of her housemate dogs got a little too close to her while she was chewing on her toy, and they got told. Um, Fortunately, Ghibli lives in a very communication savvy household, both the dogs and the humans. And after, this was an appropriate amount of communication. She said, "Hey, back off." It came with a little vocal snarl, and the dog went, "All right, heard," and the dog went away. If the dog was not willing to move away, or if the dog was the type to engage, this would be a moment to intervene between the two dogs and move the approaching dog away. And that's what I want to stress in this particular photo, is that in this photo, it can be very easy to say, well, Ghibli is being aggressive. These are, and she is, these are aggressive behaviors. These are repulsion behaviors, fairly high up on the canine ladder of aggression. But a lot of dog communication rests in being able to use those signals to actively communicate. Now, if the other dog is not hearing her, that is a reason that we need to intervene before that behavior escalates further up the ladder of aggression and results in a dog fight. But her telling the other dog, "Hey, back off, this is mine," is not an inappropriate thing for her to do. That toy is hers. She is in possession, and it would be rude for the other dog to snatch it away. So the correct action in this situation is, if the dog isn't going to listen to her, to call the dog away or to physically move the other dog away. Not to punish Ghibli and not to take away her toy, but we want to tell her, yeah, you're right, that's your thing. I am going to support you in this. So she, over time, does not feel the need to escalate beyond this communication, and may, in fact, not even feel the need for this degree of intensity of communication, because she knows that the humans have her back. She knows that the other dogs are not going to be allowed to disturb her when she's in her space and has her thing, because she's entirely able to have that thing. And so this is an example of not only a intense possessive reaction, but one where the aggression is serving its purpose as communication and is not a negative thing in and of itself. It becomes a negative thing when there's harm done to, other animals or other humans. It's a negative thing when that communication isn't effective, and those signals are ignored, so more intense behavior has to be taken. So really, really good communication example from Miss Ghibli there. So then I have the other two dogs you saw at the beginning. This is Falco and Maggie, and they get two pictures side by side, because unfortunately for Falco, I do not have a picture of him not looking stressed. And fortunately for Miss Maggie, I do not have a picture of her looking stressed. So as we look at these two dogs, these are two very different breed type dogs, right? We've got a nice smooth coat on the German Shepherd. We've got an adorable scruffy little coat on Miss Maggie the Terrier. We have floppy ears. We have perked ears. We have very different faces, very different eyes, ears, and mouth sets, very different posture. So think about what examples and what commonalities between the two dogs tell you that Falco is stressed in this photo and Maggie is not stressed in that photo, and why that is accurate for that particular dog and not just a general understanding. So looking between the two of them, we've got Falco, who we have a dramatic weight shift. His weight is shifted backwards. He is ready to get the heck out of Dodge as soon as he might need to. He is making himself smaller. He is holding himself low. This is not a dog who is, if we're looking at that geometry of aggression, this is not a dog who is forming a perfect rectangle. This is a dog who is a rhombus at best. So he is dramatically shifted backwards. He is hunched over. He's holding himself low to the ground. You can see his mouth is very tightly closed and his brow is furrowed. And while he is willing to stick his nose out to sniff what I've got, and this was um, a offered greeting on his part as we were working on him getting used to me. He is nervous, and were I to make any sudden moves, you probably would see him jump backwards and start barking. That is what I would expect from this dog. This is not a dog looking for a fight. And you can see that this is not a dog looking for a fight because he is not forward in any way other than his nose and his ears. And he is willing to warily examine my hand as long as everything else stays chill. So the right thing to do in this situation is exactly what we're doing. I'm holding myself still. I'm not facing him head on. I'm turned slightly away, and I'm letting him make the choice to come up to me in a very controlled training environment. And that's how I would recommend greeting a dog like this, because he does need very careful introductions because he's a worried boy. He's a little conflicted. He is interested in what I have. I've been tossing him treats, but he is a very, very worried boy. Now, then we have Miss Maggie, who's got a very relaxed ear set for her ear type. Her eyes are perfectly round. I would say even more spherical than Mouse's were when she was alert. But in looking at her face, you can see there's no tension around the eyes. This is a relaxed eye shape for this dog. So you have these more terrier types, or a lot of the small dogs, they do have very naturally round eyes. That's not to say that they are stressed all the time. This is an appropriate eye shape for this dog when they're relaxed. Her mouth is open, and yeah, I can see all her teeth. But in comparison to Ghibli, which I'll flip back to here, when you can see Ghibli's teeth, you can see them around these very, very tight lips. When I can see Maggie's teeth, there is nothing tight about her lips. There is nothing tight about the tension of her tongue. It is fully lolling out, and it's a warm summer day, and so it makes sense that she would be panting. Her weight is shifted slightly forward on her right foreleg, but she is generally balanced. She's not having trouble maintaining a sit. What I would expect next from a dog like this is either to happily accept petting or possibly jump up in enthusiasm for greeting. This is a happy dog. So looking at these two, these are some of the examples that you want to see in um, analyzing a dog's full body and analyzing what would be appropriate and what would match for that particular dog in this particular moment, in this particular environment. So using all of that, kind of coming to a conclusion about whether a dog is okay for me to approach them, as it would be in Maggie's case. In Maggie's case, I might still kneel on the ground just so she's able to come and greet me without launching up at me. So not to encourage jumping, but I'm not going to have any wariness about making quick movements or moving at all. Where in Falco's case, I'm not moving from from that spot. And that's one of the reasons that he has a leash on him that's being controlled by another handler, because if I'm not moving from that spot, I absolutely, should he decide to react, especially should he decide to react aggressively forward towards me, I want to make sure that there's someone who's available to restrain him, because me moving backwards is not going to make the situation better. So that's a way that you can set up that safety net in situations where you are making yourself less threatening. And in the process of making yourself less threatening, in many cases, making yourself less threatening does make you somewhat vulnerable. So having that second person who's available to hold on to a leash, available to be ready to restrain the dog if need be, can help keep you safe in situations where you do feel that the dog is ready to make that first greeting. That's also where muzzles can absolutely be necessary additions to keep yourself safe from a dog who is a little bit conflicted and working on getting used to new stimuli, new triggers, new stressors. So as we look at other dog interactions, one of the things that I really, really like to do is look at how dogs play and interact with one another, to help inform what we can do and what we can look for in dog movement. Because one of the shortcomings of looking at photos of dogs is that we are capturing a moment in time. And often that moment in time isn't ideal for looking for, all dogs look a little bit more stiff in a photo because they are still for an elongated period of time. So what that looks like in motion makes a big difference in understanding how they are interacting with each other. So I use this video to showcase what makes a good interaction with dogs. And some of the things that I want to emphasize here is that they are not getting more intense with each other. You can see that they continually give each other space. And while their mouths are open, their bodies stay loose and appropriate. Their tails are held relatively neutrally. I mean, they are excited. They are wagging, but their tails are held relatively neutrally. And if one of them is in a vulnerable position where you can see the golden retriever puppy ends up on his back several times, the other dog is giving them space to get back up, and the other dog is engaging back right away. So if you're looking at that from a human perspective, is the dog, if they are they choosing to be in vulnerable positions? Are they offering a down? Are they offering a sit? Are they uncomfortable giving a down or a sit? If they are asked to down and they can do it, do they try to pop up right away and make distance? What are they looking for? And how does, those same play principles where dogs give each other space, are we also giving one another, are we also giving space in those situations? Are we also giving space for the dogs to make those decisions and being a good play partner for the dog? And then if we're giving space, what does the dog do? Does the dog choose to come into our space again, or does the dog choose to make more distance? If they are put in a position, if they are asked for a down and we then give them space, do they choose to relax into that down? Do they choose to engage for more affection, or do they again try to get up and move away? So looking at this nice play interaction can also influence how we interact with those dogs. So looking at that again, another thing that we're looking at is how they're holding their body. So they stay super loose, they stay super wiggly. You can see that they both kind of come into each other on curves rather than straight ahead. Dogs don't do a lot of head-to-head greetings. Even when their faces are connecting, you can see their bodies kind of curl around one another. And even as their mouths are open, their ears are up, they stay relaxed. And that's another piece of it, is that the energy is high, arousal is high in this play session, but you don't see them escalating in intensity. You don't see them getting more enmeshed with one another. You don't see them struggling to maintain control. They're able to take breaks from each other, even if they're momentary. And they're not doing a lot of connecting with each other, even though they're doing a lot of bitey face, that mouth play. They aren't actually connecting with one another as they move. So looking for that in their interactions with people. Obviously, we don't want them doing bitey face with us, but looking for that in their interactions with people, that loose level amount of energy, even if it's high energy, that it's able to stay level. That loose level amount of energy makes a big difference in good body language versus body language that's heading nowhere good. So then another piece of good interactions is what effective de-escalation looks like. So this was a video of two dogs having a really good time with one another. As I mentioned before, Mouse is my reactive dog. She doesn't get along with a lot of dogs, but what she does love is puppies. And so this was Comet's, I think, second stay with us, and he's remained one of her good buddies because she's known him since he was a baby. And then what you'll see in the next video is Fig and Logan, who were not buddies. Logan was a board and train who came to stay, and he was working on his dog-dog interactions because he has a tendency to ignore dog signals. And what you'll see with Fig is her restraint, but her willingness to move up the ladder of aggression and move up in the intensity of her responses when those responses are ignored. Now you'll notice that these responses aren't punished, not in the sense that we think of punishing. She's not being yelled at. She's not being told to go back to him. He's not, beating her up over it. They are punished in that they are not effective. They do not achieve the results that she's looking for. So let's go into video starts and she's already moving away from him to move to me. He comes up to her muzzle and she's turning her face away again. He cringes a little, but then he tries again. She's turning away even more dramatically. And yes, this is in slow motion. But he comes back again. And now we have almost a full shoulder turn away. And she does it twice in a row that he's not listening to. So this is where she pauses for a minute and you see she'll get stiff. And then she's turning even more of her body away. He pursues her. And this is where I'm interrupting. So I don't want her to escalate past these turns away. I'm seeing those turnaways get more intense. I'm seeing them become more frequent. I'm seeing her turning more of her body away. I'm seeing her body get increasingly tense as she's turning away. And I don't want that to escalate into snapping at him. But I also want Logan to learn that he needs to move away when he's seeing these more subtle signs of displeasure, because he lives with an older dog who I believe is a sight hound. So we've got much thinner than him. He's not a fat dog by any means, but he's a bowling ball of a dog. So he's got a very slight older dog sibling, who's not only skinny, but is older, has thinner skin. And he needs to learn to listen to these lighter corrections so he doesn't get himself into trouble and he doesn't end up accidentally hurting his older housemate. So I'm intervening in that and rewarding him making the decision to turn away from her, and then rewarding them for just kind of existing together. But what I want to emphasize in terms of body language is how those different pieces are communicated. And when you break down Fig's body language, how clear it is that she does not want to be involved in the interaction, and how gradually she escalates up that scale of aggression, because ultimately she is a fairly decent puppy raiser sometimes. She's aware Logan is an adolescent. He's not meaning any harm. He is just being rude. And so she is not overly stressed in this situation. So she's able to move through that ladder fairly deliberately, fairly thoughtfully. The other things that are influencing this is that she does trust me that I am going to intervene. And so that's where that human intervention really makes a difference in situations that do involve multiple dogs. I mentioned it with Ghibli and the resource guarding, that Ghibli was fully entitled to the resource she has. So taking steps to move the other dogs away makes a difference in her willingness to escalate. The same is true with Fig. She can see that she's on a leash. She's not on a leash, excuse me. She's not on a leash, and Logan is. Logan is somewhat restrained. She can move out of his circle if she wants to. It's not worth it to her in the moment because she's well aware that I'm there and I have treats. But there are factors there that are going to mitigate the degree of her response. But we have that gradual escalation, and learning to recognize that without the slowed down video, to recognize that she is communicating displeasure in these moments, makes when the behavior escalates, if the behavior escalates to snaps or growls or bites, we can see that this didn't come out of nowhere, that she actually communicated multiple times that she was not happy in this interaction. So let's watch through that one more time and just kind of make note of the times that she turns away or otherwise communicates that she would like to leave the way that this interaction is happening. So we have that first one, and then 2. I think she growled a little there. 3, where she goes away much more. And you can see her tail is moving, but it is up right until now, and now it's just up and still. So she was wagging initially, and now she is not, which is another reason that, we have that stiffening up. We have that additional display of intensity, that additional display of stress, which is where my intervention comes in, where I'm rewarding him for moving away. And as soon as he's moving away, you'll notice that her gaze shifts to now my treats. Her tail is wagging again. It gets lower and less intense. And she's willing to stay close to him, and she's willing to lay down even, which is a more vulnerable position. And even when he lays down much closer to her than I would have wanted, she is not moving away because she's able to recover from that situation very quickly. So a lot of really, really solid body language to kind of look into as Fig demonstrates her displeasure in the situation at hand. So the next one I want to look at is a dog's stress reactions on an outing. That shake off. So as you're watching that, one thing that I want to really emphasize in this video in particular is how deceptive those still images can be. Because if you watch that video, you'll notice there is such a variety of body language. She is loose and wiggly, and then she's stiff, and then her ears are perked, and then she's intense, and then she's loose and wiggly again. Sometimes in a moment of just depending on where her focus is, how relaxed she is. So I think it's easy to look at those individual images and kind of assess them as a static moment of this is something that is continuing. But in everyday life, that body language can shift very rapidly, especially for a dog who is treat motivated, who does have training, who does have skill sets, who is happy to be out, but has triggers in their environment. Now, Lucy can be a little bit sensitive to her environment, but largely it is prey and people and dogs who are those triggers. So when she's actively working with me, she gets nice and loose. Those ears go to a more relaxed state. We got a lovely little shake off at one point. But as soon as there is a new trigger, we are seeing that tenseness go back up. And in some cases, that tenseness goes up when she's looking out and then relaxes back immediately as she turns back toward me. But if she's not able to do that, and a shift in that way, or I'm not seeing that overall level of stress decrease, that might be an indication that we are working too hard. And you'll notice near the end of that video, she was having a lot more trouble coming back to me and relaxing her body language over again. And what that told me in the beginning, where it was a bird that was going to leave and we were going to get past, we just needed to do a little treat scatter while the bird did their bird things and flew away. Um, that meant I needed like a longer reward session and more time to calm down. Near the end of the training session, though, that was an indication to me that we were done. Our training session was over. And yes, maybe we had intended to do more work against the neutral dog, but that's not how the training session went, based on the other triggers that were in her environment. So there's an importance in kind of evaluating how those stress triggers are stacking one on top of the other, because we, right now, we've gotten some lookaways, we've gotten a lot of body tension, we've got some stiffening up, but we haven't escalated to a growl or barking or snapping or any of those larger reactions that indicate higher levels of stress and work themselves up on the canine aggression scale. We didn't have any of that. And ideally, I want to finish a training session without any of that occurring. And that means I need to make sure I'm listening to those lower level stress signals that tell me that this work is getting harder and harder for Lucy. And despite the fact that we didn't do all of the things that maybe we meant to do in this session, the session should be over in order for her not to rehearse those more intense reactions that you can see from her. So going on to the next video, this is a little bit shorter.
Wow. So little like treat retreaty stuff.
And this is a dog who is very conflicted. She is so excited to be social, so happy to be social, and she's
Nice.
willing
Good
to this new
girlies.
person to say hi. We've got a I would say happy
I know
wagging
that's a whole
tail.
bag.
But as she approaches her, she gets a little bit more hunched. It's hard to see with the hood. She gets a little more hunched.
Wow.
She gets a
So little
little,
like
her
treat
weight shifts
retreaty stuff.
back. And that's how you can see that a dog is showing signs of stress when greeting a new person, even though they are happy. And honestly,
Nice.
most
Good
dogs who are
girly.
fearful are in some ways conflicted because most dogs are
I
interested in
know.
social
I know
interaction,
that's a whole bag.
especially with humans. They were bred to be. They were, this is years of genetics informing them that they want to connect with humans.
Wow.
So
So little like treat
we have this
retreaty
dog
stuff.
who is very sweet and very, very interested in the human. So I'm giving her a little bit more space. She has a longer line on, and you'll notice that
Nice. Good
while this
girly.
person, who is another trainer, is feeding the
I
dog, she's
know.
also feeding the
I know
dog
that's
and
a
then
whole
tossing
bag.
treats away. Tossing the treats away gives her time to reset, and you'll notice every time she tosses treats away, Daisy is coming back
Wow. So
happier
little
and
like treat
wigglier
retreaty
and
stuff.
more interested in continuing an interaction. So she eats, she's a little bit low, she turns
Wow.
away, and
So
you can
little
see
like
that
treat
tail's not
retreaty
moving
stuff.
until she turns back. And then she's eating, and we're wagging, and she's willing to come back in. Still a little bit low,
Nice.
but
Good
her body language is
girly.
getting more and more loose every time she chooses to approach
I
a leash rather
know.
than being
I know that's a whole
lured into
bag.
approaching a leash. So she's learning that she can come and say hi, and then she can get the relief of a little bit of distance afterwards so she doesn't continue
Wow.
to
So
stack
little
on
like treat
triggers, because this
retreaty
is
stuff.
absolutely a dog who might start barking, who might start kind of cringing and collapsing in on herself if she's too
Nice.
close
Good
to a new person
girly.
for too long. So, importance of
I
looking at
know.
those
I know that's a
reactions
whole
and
bag.
adjusting our training plan and our greeting plan accordingly with what we see the dog doing. And as she's getting used to
Wow.
the new
So
person,
little
she's
like treat
able to spend
retreaty
more
stuff.
time hanging out with her before the treat is tossed away and she's rewarded with a little bit of distance. So, for the last bit, I want to kind of drill down on one
Nice.
particular
Good
dog.
girly.
And this dog is Enzo. He
I
is a
know. I know that's a
adolescent
whole
dog
bag.
who's I've been working with for several months now, and he is very, very fearful of newcomers. So we're just getting to a point where he can handle me being visible during the majority of his session in these videos. So this is over the course of one recent session. All of these clips are from the same day. So you can see he starts out, he's very tense. He's very alert and very focused on me. It's difficult for him to look anywhere else when he's looking at me, but he does have skills that tell him that looking back to his mom is the right thing to do, so he's able to do that. However, he gets frozen, and when he freezes, you can see that whole weight shift up, and that's where we get the higher intensity reaction. So, in response to that, rather than asking him to work at that same distance, mom moved him back and started again. The next clip is from further in on the session. We have done a lot of work back and forth. We've gotten him to a point where he's working closer. And I want to kind of take a look at how we are
Yes,
moving him
good
closer
boy.
and using his body language to inform where we're going. So she has the choice. She can move forward or backwards or give him a break. And you
Yeah,
can see
good
he's much
boy.
looser in this clip than he was in the prior clip. He spent some more time.
Perfect.
He's gotten used to where I am, and he's feeling much more comfortable, and even those
Beautiful.
glances at
And
me
let's end
are
there. That
much
was much
less
nicer. That's a much
sticky
happier
and
spot to end
intense
on.
than they were at the beginning of the session. So even when he looks at me there because I was talking too long, he's able to
Look
reconnect
at
with
that.
mom.
Yes, good
Now, I think
boy.
you might look at that first reaction and say, "Oh, that was too much for him. Why did we bring him back out? Why did we push him closer?" So, pushing thresholds,
Yeah,
especially
good
in controlled
boy.
training environments where the dog doesn't have the option to escalate in aggression or intensity towards their
Perfect.
trigger. He's on a leash at the point where we did start getting closer. He was on a
Beautiful.
leash and in a
And let's
muzzle
end there. That was much
in order
nicer.
to
That's a much
ensure
happier
everybody's
spot to end
safety.
on.
But we had to push this threshold a little bit in order to make him more successful. And
Look
what
at
I
that.
look at when I'm
Yes,
deciding
good
whether to push
boy.
thresholds is the dog's overall body language. We talked about it a little bit in that video with Lucy of looking at her move through this outing and how quickly and how readily she was able to go from tense and alert towards something to loose and wiggly paying attention to me. If she was able to do that quickly, then all right, that's fine. Now, early on in this session, she did have a hard time focusing in on me, so I gave her a bigger break and then checked back in, but treated it like a warm up. And that's a little bit what happened at in that first clip of Enzo is, he was just coming out, he was getting warmed up, and then he had a reaction and we pulled back. We gave him distance, we gave him a moment, we sat back, we recovered, we adjusted our approach, and then he was able to come back. And near the end, we were seeing more of body language like this with Lucy, where it was very loose and very able to casually look around. I love that shake off, that casual look around. And then he was able to see me and yes, would get intense for a moment, but then just like Lucy did there, was able to hop back over to mom. And when that started getting tough again, out of fatigue and less out of surprise and not being prepared, we ended the session there. So looking at that again, look at where that body language starts as very stiff and almost, even when he's focused on mom, his body is held a lot more tightly. His tail is not tucked, but it is still. And there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of stillness in his posture, whether he's looking at mom, whether he's looking at me, whether he's looking at there are treats at the bottom of the stairs. Regardless, what he's looking at, he's very tense. And then we go, okay, this way. We don't want to have too intense a reaction. And we walked him back and gave him a break. Here, we're
Look at
much more
that.
relaxed.
Yes, good
His weight is
boy.
shifted. He's not comfortable. But when he turns back to mom, it's less of a abrupt movement. He's able to move smoothly and fluidly.
Yeah, good boy.
His tail is still low, but it kind of moves as he walks a little bit. It's not held stiffly.
Perfect.
And so when he does get a little stickier with me there,
Beautiful. And
that's
let's
when we
end
know,
there.
okay,
That was
we're
much
probably
nicer.
getting
That's a much
tired. We
happier
don't want
spot
to
to end
push
on.
here. But pushing past that piece of resistance is what allows
Look at
dogs to
that.
really
Yes, good
have resilience
boy.
and have those good experiences um, after they had the reaction. So we don't stop immediately. We just kind of weigh what is
Yeah,
influencing this
good
body language
boy.
and can we make him more comfortable and still push forward. And that's what we were able to do
Perfect.
as his sessions progressed.
Beautiful.
So before I wrap up, I want to end on this good note of looking at happy dogs. So we've looked at a lot of pictures and a lot of videos of identifying a variety of ways we can see that a dog is unhappy, see that a dog is recovering from being unhappy, seeing a dog as, going back and forth with being unhappy, how dogs respond when they're unhappy. And so I wanted to end on these stills of happy dogs. So variety of dogs, you can see that they all have some things in common, whether their mouths are open or closed. I do only have one closed mouth. Their mouths are relaxed. They are not held stiffly in any way. We don't see, even the dog who at the angle we have, we see a lot of teeth. We wouldn't see a lot of teeth if we were looking from a different angle, if we were looking from the side or from the front. We don't see a lot of their teeth. There's no tension in their jaw. There is no tension in their muzzle. Whether they're scruffy or full of whiskers or not, we can't see individual pores in their set. And even where we can, in that bottom right picture, you can see those are not puffed out in the same way. We can see them specifically because of the difference in pigment between the skin and the fur, and not so much because the dog is aroused in that way. There is a relaxed ear set. Now, there's a variety of breed types in here. There is a difference in what those ear sets would do, but if we look in between their ears, we can see that their brow isn't furrowed, nothing is held tight. Even the corgi, who, corgis can be a little bit interested in resource guarding. I wonder if I got closer, if we would see a little bit more curling in around that bully stick. But at the moment, we have no furrowed brow. And, using that corgi as an example, his down, he is lying on one side on his hip. His back leg is out and relaxed. He is not ready for motion. He is not ready to defend himself. For the dogs whose tails we can see that they're held relatively neutrally. You have the lab in the center top, whose tail is gently wagging. And there's just an overall lack of stiffness in their bodies, even for the dogs who are holding themselves at an angle. You have the spaniel who's leapt up on a perch. You have Fig at the bottom middle, who is perched on a rock, and she's shifted in her weight to keep her balance on the rock. There is no tenseness, there is no readiness for motion in any of these pictures. And so that's what I want to take with you as a um, counter to some of the behaviors you're seeing in the less happy, more stressed or fearful dogs. As these are the counters, this is what the happy dog side looks like. And to keep all of these things in mind as you're evaluating and assessing dogs, of what signs of happiness are you seeing and what signs of enthusiasm you're seeing. Um, and I like this set of dogs because you also see a huge difference in facial types. You see some round eyes, but you can see how those round eyes are not tense or stressed. All of these eyes are nice and soft and excited to be wherever they are. So, as you're looking at dogs' body language, make sure that you're taking in the entirety of the dog. Really take note of the things that you personally are drawn towards and the things that maybe may have flown underneath your radar in the past. So, you can really get the fullest picture of what a dog is telling you, how they're communicating, and how you can best respond to make sure that they don't feel the need to escalate up that ladder of aggression. So that's it for our dog body language talk. We are coming in at just under an hour and a half. I hope you found this super helpful. I hope you learned a lot. If you do need to get in touch with me, you can email me at liz@likemagicdogtraining.com or follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook at Like Magic Dog Training, as well as TikTok at Like Magic Dog Training, and I am on Instagram at Like Magic Dogs. Again, I'm Liz Cummins, and I hope you have a wonderful day full of lovely, happy dog body language. Bye.